Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Today, I want to talk through some of my favorite photos that I've shot over the past couple of years. And more specifically, I want to talk about them in terms of composition. I thought it would be really fun to make a video like this, sort of breaking down the images and talking about the different aspects that I think go into a successful composition. Things like framing, the color, the light in the photo is the kinds of things that I'll be talking about today with some of the photos that I've made over the past couple of years. This is a very personal topic, and by no means what I say is meant to be taken as a rule. These are the kinds of things that I'm just looking for in my photos. And the cool thing about photography is that you can do whatever you want with your photos. I just thought it would be cool to break down some of my images, share my thought process, and hopefully that's inspiring or helpful to some of you with your own photography. I should mention that a lot of the photos you'll see today are also in my new book, On the Sunny Side of the Street. You can find out more about this on my website, which I'll link in the description. So I thought I would break down my thoughts and techniques into different categories. And the first one I want to break down is framing. I know that framing is very broad, but I'm thinking about it in terms of lines and shapes in the images. So I have a couple here that I think make sense for this topic. This first one I chose because it's a very easy photo to pinpoint how the framing works, right? So starting off at the top, I'm using the traditional rule of thirds, which I think is a silly rule, but in this case it works. So the horizon line is kind of the top third, and then the bottom 2/3 are split in half by this diagonal line. So that kind of creates some interesting visual geometry with these triangles and rectangles, and it also helps that the colors help to separate those shapes. I think that's a very simple one to break down, but I like the photo a lot because of that. And I also like this out of focus area in the bottom left. I think typically landscape people will tell you that you need to shoot at the smallest aperture possible so that you get everything in focus, but I like the fact that the foreground is out of focus here. And as you move into the frame, it becomes more in focus. This next image I chose, I think demonstrates really well a technique that I use in a lot of my images, which is sort of this corner perspective. When you look at houses and cars, which are typically the subject of a lot of my photos, they're always very rectangular. So when you stand at the corner like this, you get these converging lines from the rectangular shapes. And it creates this really dynamic composition where you get lines going from left to right and right to left. And overall, it just brings your eyes into the middle of the photo, I think, which is where the subject is in this case. I also just love the overall beige palette of this photo, and I think some of these red and pink colors from the taillight and flowers look really nice with the curtains that are also in the background. And I love the Toyota Cressida, what a cool car. And this next one is also a great example of that. Again, if you look at the siding of the houses, it sort of all points in this one direction and creates an interesting flow of lines. What I like about this image is that it's incredibly chaotic with the power lines everywhere, the poles, the three houses in the foreground, and somehow the lines sort of organize it in a way that I like, and it becomes organized chaos, I think. What makes this image for me is the reflection in the window. That's a very specific time of day that you get to make a photo like this, and sort of framing the roof of the other house in the window like this creates kind of a nice frame within a frame, and it also just says a lot about the time of day that the photo was taken, I think. Here's a photo that I posted recently on my Instagram of this tree shot in San Francisco. And this is the kind of photo where I think if you described it technically, it wouldn't make sense. This is a very weirdly center-weighted photo, and it also has this weird branch going off of the edge. But I think in this case, a center-weighted frame makes sense, right? This is not something I would want to use the rule of thirds on, because it kind of creates this nice division in the frame where you have the golden light coming in on the left and then the blue light where the sun isn't shining on the right. Then there's also this branch in the foreground, which I think just kind of leads you into the frame. The horizon line also cuts right through the middle, which I think works nice in this case. And yeah, I like this photo a lot. This next frame is from my series Walking Svalbard, which was printed as a zine last year. Compositionally, I like this photo a lot because it creates this very eerie feeling. It's split into sort of 5 different areas. First off, there's the sky. Then you have the red house, the blue house, the white container, and the snow. So it creates these 5 very distinct shapes. There's something about this very dark space in between the houses that I find very eerie, and I like it because it conveys the mystery of sort of the 24 hours of darkness that Svalbard has in the winter months. And I also think the faint blue tint in the sky adds another nice mysterious feeling to the photo and just conveys the idea of the 24 hours of darkness. So that's why this one was on the cover of the book. The second topic I want to talk about is spacing, and this has more so to do with how you use the edges of the frame. So let's take a look at this first photo here taken in Coney Island, New York. The subject of this photo is the 4 people sitting on the bench, and around them is a ton of open room in the frame. There's a lot of space, a lot of sky and ocean in this image, as well as the boardwalk. There's really nothing filling the edges, so it creates this very airy, open feeling photo. I think if we look at a polar opposite example of that, which would be this photo of the Mustang sitting in the barn, this photo has a much more closed feeling because the edges of the frame cut off all these different lines, garage door, tables, all these different elements in the photo are being cut off. So you get a much more closed feeling photo, just a very different approach. The very open photo feels like you're showing the viewer everything, and the very closed photo feels like you're showing the viewer just a very specific focus. Even though it's the same format, same edges, it just conveys a very different feeling, and I always try to consider whether I want to cut things off, like in the barn photo, or I want to leave a very open frame, like in the Coney Island photo. Yo, are you guys good? The next set of photos I want to show you are from the Outer Banks in North Carolina, and you may have seen these in a recent video of mine. I want to show you these photos because I think they're interesting in the sense that they don't follow any of the stereotypical rules of photography that you're told to use, like the rule of thirds, for example. I specifically shot these photos like this one of the pier here in a way that is seemingly very sporadic, as if they were almost intentionally not composed. So when you look at this photo here, the horizon line is going straight through the middle. There's different things that fill the edges of the frame. The subject is sort of right in the center, which is the sun. I think if we look at this next photo, again, there's really no sort of way to define this composition. And I like that because it just seems like you're looking at the world and at these scenes exactly the way that you would look at them with your eyes, sort of just naturally and very unfiltered. So that means cutting off things like this Monday through Friday sign and having these weird gaps. Maybe the lines aren't even perfectly straight. There's this awning that cuts right across the edge of the frame. And this just makes it seem very sporadic. And I like that because it seems like you're just really looking at these things with your own eyes. Again, this one with the window of the Jeep, it sort of has this weird feeling where the seat is out of focus in the front and the window is taking up a lot of the frame. But this was just what it looks like to sit in that seat and look out the window of that Jeep. So even if this doesn't really follow any rules of traditional landscape photography, I like it because the framing sort of just conveys a specific intention, which is just to show a very unfiltered look at things. These photos feel very instinctual to me. These compositions came natural. This was just the way that I was seeing things. So I guess the point of this set is don't take the rules too seriously and just do things your own way. Let's move on to the next topic, which is using color as a composition technique. So in this first photo here that was also in Walking Svalbard, the main thing that defines the composition here isn't really any specific subject in the frame, it's the color. And so there's three main patches of color here. There's the blue above the mountain range, there's this purple in the middle of the frame, and then the teal in the foreground. And it creates this very blocked composition just by using the color that was present in the scene. I think this photo was interesting because the point of walking Svalbard was kind of looking for interesting light in the 24 hours of darkness that Svalbard goes through in the winter period. So this photo kind of defined that challenge for me. Here's another one. This is the kind of photo that I could take into Photoshop and spot pick like the four colors that define this composition. And so this composition was largely based around those four colors. I think that's what creates visual interest here, is the separation that those colors make. And I know that that's what makes this photo interesting for me, because if I turn this into a black and white photo, there is no visual interest here. I mean, the lines are slightly interesting, but it's definitely that faint blue color in the sky and the warm light coming from the windows that I think makes this composition interesting. Here's a photo from on the sunny side of the street where there's sort of a very dominant color palette of green. And I think that's what makes the photo for me, is this very green room with green carpet, green ceilings, green pillars supporting the glass. And then the warm color of the chair kind of complements that, as well as the blue sign outside. Polar opposite to that would be this photo from Svalbard, where it's majority a very red composition. So these are very contrasting images, but they're interesting because there is so much of one color in these photos, and that's why I like them. The final topic, and arguably one of the biggest things that is going through my mind when I'm taking pictures and composing photos, is light, and how light itself can be the subject of the photo and the subject of the composition. So let's take this photo I shot in San Francisco, for example, again, on the sunny side of the street. I think light is what determined me to compose this photo this way. And it starts with that window on the left, which has this beaming glow to it. It looks like something out of a horror movie, and this sort of night light contrasting with the window light coming from all these different houses is, I think, what makes the photo for me. I also shot this photo during the day, and it wasn't nearly as interesting. Some other fun elements are the gradient of light in the sky, where it goes from blue above the ocean, which was to the left, to this sort of orange coming from the street lights on the right. And yeah, overall a very interesting lighting condition. Here's one final example for light defining the composition of a photo. It's a mix of this green coming from a street lamp across the road, the faint blue in the sky, and then this glowing cross right in the middle of the frame, which all create kind of a nice contrast. And again, I think that's what really defines this specific composition. Thank you so much for watching. And finally, thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Squarespace is an incredible all-in-one website building platform that you can use to build your photography portfolio online. I've been using Squarespace for over 3 years at this point, and they've made it so incredibly easy to get a website up and running with my photography. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can hit the link in my description for a 14-day free trial of Squarespace, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Willem for 10% off your first purchase of website or a domain. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next week with another video. That's it for now. Peace.